How about the 10 units? How did you fund the 10 unit deal?
So there's another funding source, is a state-specific funding source called the Affordable Housing Trust Funds. And this is through the same organization, NJDCA, and they will provide up to $6 million to build projects of 25 units or less. We have this project donated property again, and then we have around, I want to say $2.1 million from that available $6 million pot called the Affordable Housing Production Funds. And then we were able to get $400,000 from the Federal Home Loan Bank of New York. We also have over $300,000 from, again, the local county, Monmouth County, New Jersey. And then we have another around $300,000 that the township on top of the land donated. The towns have something called the Municipal Housing Trust Funds. Basically, all those pooled together, it's a little over $3 million that we're in total for that project, all in development wise. And that's also under construction. Yeah, it's 10 one-bedroom apartments for seniors, kind of one-level garden style apartments. We're also in heavy pre-development on a $27 million, 67-unit LIHTC deal that hopefully would be under construction in the spring. So we're kind of all-encompassing. I got the LIHTC side down at my last job, and now I'm just sort of incorporating other forms of more community-based development in.
You just mentioned that you're doing some LIHTC projects. Let's talk about how you're funding your projects right now.
New Jersey has sort of a lot of different funding mechanisms. A lot of them don't play well together. So the LIHTC project that I'm working on right now is actually a 4% deal. We got our initial, what's called Declaration of Intent in New Jersey last year. And then we just submitted for our final commitments that I should hear about by the end of the year. For our commitments that include mortgages from the state agency, but also $9+ million from that Affordable Housing Production Fund. So that would help close the gap on the rest of the projects when we get the commitment for that.
When you get 4% tax credits, that generally fills a little bit of the capital stack. Was that about 20, 30, 40% of your capital stack?
Yeah, so primarily we're using 2 mortgage notes basically from the funding agency combines with the Affordable Housing Production Funds. And that's all kind of on the perm end. And then the front end is basically a construction loan and LIHTC equity. So the land is donated by the town, and that is a land acquisition, tends to be one of the biggest hurdles probably anywhere at this point, but you definitely in New Jersey, land is very expensive. Through everything else this year, we have spent probably roughly around $1 million to get us in a position where we have site plan approval, our entitlements in place, 100% construction plans, and we are moving through the process of DEP approvals, which is environmental stuff, and then we're ready for building permits once we have those approvals. It's basically just tax credit equity combined with the little tax credit equity that's in there at construction closing, combined with a massive construction loan. We have like a $23 million construction loan from a lender.
How are you approaching your smaller project? You talked about a 3-unit and a 10-unit. What type of funding sources are there available, and how are you applying it to those projects?
Yeah, so there's a few different funding sources out there. They just happen to go through different agencies. There's a funding source called the National Housing Trust Fund. That's
Welcome to another episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Guys, today I have Chris Pugliese. And I talked to this guy briefly while I was driving, and when he told me about all the work he has done from holding various positions in affordable housing to being where he is today, I was like, dude, you gotta come on to the podcast. I gotta have people listen to your story. So Chris, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today?
Thank you, Ken. I'm doing pretty good, doing well. Excited to have another day in this industry.
Dude, you are my guy because you got that background with is that a sunset or a sunrise? What we're looking at?
Yeah, I believe it's probably a Miami sunset there.
These sunsets are just something my wife and I chase every single time wherever we go. So I think you and I are in the same vibes, that's for sure. But Chris, besides being a sunset lover, who is Chris? How did you even get into affordable housing in the first place, man? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, it was a little bit of journey. I was a little lost in my 20s, and then I found myself role in a public housing authority, and not even in the development side at that point. I'm in a totally different area in affordable housing. So.
Well, tell me more. So what was your role initially at a housing authority? And the reason I want to highlight this is because I really want people to understand that there are so many ways to get involved in affordable housing. You can be in finance, you can be in HR, you can be in IT. There are so many roles to play that truly benefits the residents. Not just your property manager, your asset manager, your leasing agent. There's so many people that are involved. So, Chris, what was sort of like your role initially? And more importantly, what did you learn from that role that you can now apply towards development?
Yeah, no, I think that role is actually crucial to where I am today. So that was CSS, Community Supportive Services caseworker position. It was the Long Branch Housing Authority where I initially was employed in this world. I had gone through a redevelopment of one of their sites previous to me being there through something called the Hope 6 program. So that included a case management portion for certain residents that had been through the redevelopment process. So there were me and two other caseworkers employed by the authority through this program in a part-time role where we were interacting with residents in a way of helping them find, connections to job possibilities, help them connect them with financial counseling and that sort of thing. And then I guess we'll talk more about that later, but just to tie all that back around, I always have that in the back of my head when we're building housing now, as far as what the residents are looking for on the ground level.
Man, when I heard that story from you, Chris, and I heard about what you did, I just knew that there are so many people out there trying to make an impact with their time and energy. And you can start from anywhere. You can start by being a caseworker. And this is truly the impact that is probably the most tangible, besides for the housing, right? Housing gave you stability. But Chris, as the caseworker, was the one that truly helped change the person's life by helping them look for jobs, by helping them get ready for job readiness, by helping them look for other resources. So this is why it's so crucial, because you have to understand, even as a developer, what the experience of the resident is and what type of support might they need. But that's just so cool, man. Thank you for doing that, Chris.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I much appreciated the opportunity at the time, and it taught me a lot about life, to be honest with you. So I think it was good for all the way around.
Well, going from the housing authority, right? What did you move on to next? Did you go straight into development next?
Yeah. So what happened was the housing authority I was at was very active in redevelopment of its sites. It had older public housing stock, and it was probably one of the more active, if not the most active in the state of New Jersey at doing redevelopment. So there was already some stuff that had happened by the time I got there. I was in the supportive services caseworking role that I just mentioned, but the executive director at that time had many different developments plans. We were bringing in large development partners, basically, to do LIHTC, to turn our public housing sites into newer LIHTC developments. We were also increasing the number of housing stock we had. So it was like one public housing project would come down, and that might equal 3 new tax credit projects with the way we were doing it. And we were kind of not a huge organization. It was like 750-ish units. That's a ballpark number. I don't know the exact number. But office staff was maybe 20 people, and that was bogged down by basically property managers, assistants to property managers, a small finance team, people that ran a Section 8 voucher program. And the executive director was kind of the one taking on the development. So somehow I just kind of slid into becoming somebody that had time to assist with the development. That was probably a year into my time as a caseworker. And that sort of morphed into a year or two later, me kind of being the main liaison with these 2 private LIHTC developers that we were working with, and being kind of the face of the housing authority with those organizations and making decisions eventually on behalf of the housing authority with those organizations. And then that sort of morphed into years later. I started at the housing authority in 2008. In 2015, I left when I was offered a position to be a project manager technically, but project director by title, with one of those LIHTC developers that I had worked with for years on 2 projects, basically the one that brought me in.
Dude, I love this story so much, Chris. I mean, this is a simple case of, one, you were doing great things already, but then when the opportunity for more work came along, you weren't the lazy person. You said, okay, let me learn this stuff. And man, I just want to hear from you. How did you learn all this stuff, man? Like, did you just have to keep asking questions? Were you reading the QAP? Were you reading the websites? For someone that is in that position that thinks like they're going to get overwhelmed, like, how did you learn that stuff piece by piece? Like, where should people even begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think reading and educating yourself as much as you can is definitely one of the more beneficial things. We also had this long-standing relationship with having these active projects with these 2 developers. So I took advantage of growing a relationship with them and just learning from them. I asked a lot of questions to people that were already in this field and working in it. I also think really the only true way to really learn development is trial and error, and just failing and falling on your face a bunch of times and getting things wrong a bunch of times. I mean, I thought I was doing great work at the Long Branch Housing Authority. I'm not going to say that I wasn't contributing well, but I know 10 times more today than I did at that time. And if I could go back in time, I would have changed a million things I did at that time. So, I mean, I think it's really putting in the work and just getting out there and doing it. As you know, every development project you work on, you think you know something, and then there's 14 new challenges that come with it the next day. So
I love how you explain the challenges of development. And it's really the scary part about development is that you don't really know what problems are going to come up. You just know something's going to go wrong. I've heard of a development that says, oh, everything was so smooth. It was on time, on budget. It never happens that way. And if you have a project like that, you got to let me know because if there is a project like that, I actually want them to talk about it on this project and be like, hey, how on earth did you prepare enough for that to happen? Because that seems almost impossible to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely impossible. The simplest, what would seem like a simple project is always going to die like 3 times during the process of pre-development. So.
Okay. Well, you went from that developer to essentially another developer, and now you're the director of housing development.
Yeah. So I spent
what did that progression look like?
Yeah, I spent about 6 years at Conifer, which is a for-profit LIHTC developer. They're based out of Rochester, New York. They were regional when I was there, mostly like kind of the Northeast. They have expanded since I left into some other states in the South, and I think they're looking at other states. But they were the 5th largest LIHTC developer in the country when I left the company, even though they were kind of regional to the Northeast. For everything I did in Long Branch, I was always working with the developer partner. It was a huge jump when I started at Conifer to really be on the ground doing LIHTC projects like start to finish and doing all aspects of them besides being like a complementary role trying to protect the housing authority. So that was a huge learning curve. And again, a lot of trial and error. A lot of jumping into things. But yeah, I had a boss there. I used to work for Charlie Lewis, who's very known in New Jersey in this industry. He was fantastic as a mentor. I learned a lot in a quick amount of time over the years. Yeah, I worked on, probably over 600-700 apartments between New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Westchester County, New York, primarily New Jersey in that time. Yeah, and I got my true feathers there as a real LIHTC developer for a few years after the government role. And then it sort of all came full circle when I had an opportunity to come to the Affordable Housing Alliance, which is a smaller organization that's a 501c3 nonprofit right back in Monmouth County, New Jersey, which is my home base. So I was a little excited to have the opportunity to come back home after years of traveling around. And I'm the director of housing development here. And I was able to come in here and sort of pitch, bringing in my LIHTC experience. But I'm sort of curtailing that into also working on a lot of smaller community-based projects. And our pitch here is I'm trying to stay sort of within 45 to 50-minute range of where we're based, which is primarily Monmouth and Ocean County, New Jersey. But say, we can come into your community and work with what makes sense in your community. So like right now I have a 3 and a 10 unit project under construction. So those are not LIHTC deals. We're also in heavy pre-development on a $27 million, 67 unit LIHTC deal that hopefully would be under construction in the spring. So we're kind of all encompassing, and I got the LIHTC side down at my last job, and now I'm sort of incorporating other forms of more community-based development in. So,
ooh, this is so good. I just love the progression. You can tell I was really looking forward to this conversation, Chris. And to your point earlier about, hey, I've learned a ton more now than I did before. I mean, you talked a lot about LIHTC, the low income housing tax credit. If you had to explain LIHTC to yourself like that many years ago, Chris, how would you try to explain LIHTC in a simple manner to someone that might have never learned anything about LIHTC in the first place for development purposes?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Take your time on this one, because I'm always looking for the easiest way to explain LIHTC. And I'm going to search for someone that explains it really, really simply, because my daughter is going to listen to this one day and I want her to get it.
I'll say it's nationally the #1 way to fund, a 100% affordable housing project of a certain size. In New Jersey, you tend to be in a window of like 50 to 80 apartments on a LIHTC deal. I think this changes state by state, but you have the 4% credit and the 9% credit. The 9% credits are very competitive in New Jersey, and there's a scoring system. But depending on the pricing at the time, you can usually cover the majority of costs on the 9% project if you're able to get funded, versus the 4% credits that come as of right and you can kind of just apply for and get in New Jersey, but then you'll need to fill millions of dollars in funding gaps on that sort of project. So yeah, I don't know if that's a good layman's explanation. It's kind of hard to go back to the basics. Yeah, I don't know. Does that work?
No, I really liked how you explained it. That was such a great overview. Sometimes people ask me, like, why would someone buy these tax credits? And I try to do like very, very simple terms. I've tried the way, and I love your opinion on this, is let's say Chris has a tax credit. He knows he's going to get a refund for $100 next year.
Yeah.
I might give you $85 for that $100 refund next year so that you can take my $85 building today with an 85, but I sort of make $15 on the refund that I'm going to get from you next year. So it's kind of like a reinvestment thing, but you didn't need that tax credit because you're a nonprofit. You don't generally have that much tax liability, especially with depreciation and everything in there. So it's just like small little things like that. But I know it's tactically not the same, but in principle, it's just you're getting money from the federal government and you're selling it back on an open market to somebody that's going to willing to buy it.
Absolutely, yes.
Man, I'm looking for better ways to explain that.
Well, I was going for the more layman overview of like what you can build here, and then you got into the specific of the tax credits. So if we could just combine the two, it's good.
Yeah, that's why we're a good team, baby. All right. Well, now that you've used LIHTC to fund some of your projects and you explain what it is, you just mentioned that you're doing some LIHTC projects and now using some other financing mechanisms to fund your project. Let's talk about how also you're funding your projects right now. And now I want to go and just talk to you a little bit about, hey, what are the pros and cons of LIHTC and what are the pros and cons of the finance mechanism that you're exploring right now for some of your smaller projects?
Yeah, certainly. New Jersey has sort of a lot of different funding mechanisms. A lot of them don't play well together. 4% LIHTC projects have been difficult in New Jersey because there's not a lot of soft money that you can pair with them. Right now, there is in various pools, but it's sort of temporary. It all kind of ties into ARPA COVID relief money that's out there. American Rescue Plan Act stuff. So in the 2023 governor's budget, one thing he put in there was a $305 million pool called the Affordable Housing Production Fund. And it was meant to fill gaps of up to $10 million on 4% LIHTC projects that otherwise would not be competitive as 9% projects. And we're in a town's approved court settlement plan. In New Jersey, towns have settlement agreements where they agree to build a certain amount of affordable housing and they lay out where and how many units they would build and that sort of thing. That's a whole New Jersey thing. It's very state specific. So that the LIHTC project that I'm working on right now is actually a 4% deal. We got our initial what's called declaration of intent in New Jersey last year. And then we just submitted for our final commitments that I should hear about by the end of the year. For our commitments that include mortgages from the state agency, but also $9+ million from that affordable housing production fund. So that would help close the gap on the rest of the projects when we get the commitment for that, which should happen on December 21st, I believe, is the state board meeting.
So let me ask you this. That's amazing. They just got $9 million from the Affordable Housing Production Fund. And just to kind of set the background here for a little bit. So you got a project, 67 units. It was roughly around $27 million
total.
27 million.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you get 4% tax credits, that generally fills a little bit of the capital stack. Was that about 20, 30, 40% of your capital stack?
Yeah. So we have primarily we're using two mortgage notes, basically from the funding agency combines with the affordable housing production funds. And that's all kind of on the perm end. And then the front end is basically a construction loan and LIHTC equity.
I want to make sure people understand how this works. So how did you acquire the land, first and foremost? Was it donated? Did you guys have to buy on an option? What did that look like?
Yeah, so the land is donated by the town, and that is a land acquisition, tends to be one of the biggest hurdles probably anywhere at this point, but you definitely in New Jersey, land is very expensive. But as I kind of mentioned with the settlement agreement stuff before, towns' housing requirements, and some towns will comply and so other towns fight more to not comply. But we are working with a town that has been meeting their settlement needs. So they have lands, and yes, they had a property that they designated for this project and they donated it to the projects basically.
Wow. And how much in soft costs does it take? You just rough range, doesn't mean exact. Like how much does soft costs should someone expect to incur to get this project approved or entitled?
So there's two phases in New Jersey, basically. Last year, we applied for a declaration of intent, which is basically just saying you have the ability to do the project and the state approves that they'll like kind of set aside these funds for you to go ahead and move forward. So that might cost $70,000, $80,000, just getting like some basic designs, making sure you can have everyone's approved and good with getting zoning in place, making sure you can tie into utilities and all that sort of thing. Just a very basic everything. And then once I got the DOI from the state, I basically had the go ahead to get through everything else this year. So we have spent probably roughly around $1 million to get us in a position where we have site plan approval, our entitlements in place, 100% construction plans, and we are moving through the process of DEP approvals, which is environmental stuff, and then we're ready for building permits once we have those approvals. But yeah, it's basically cost around $1 million to get to this point.
Got it. So $1 million of pre-entitlement costs, and then 26 million, call it, of hard and soft costs. You have interest reserves in there to kind of get the project approved and built, essentially. Got it. Now I'm following. Huge.
But I can go into the smaller project funds too. I just wanted to explain how this was a 4% project, and that was also coming from a New Jersey source, like the Affordable Housing Production Fund that was out there.
Yeah.
Temporarily in the governor's budget 1 year, $305 million. That's all committed now at this point. So that's not there anymore at this point. So.
Got it. And I think I just want people to understand, if you're looking to get into this, I mean, those settlement agreements, I'm assuming they're public information and people can go in and actually read about it. I'm not saying that there's any more funding left from the governor's Affordable Housing Production Plan, but I just want people to understand that a lot of the stuff, this is huge, right? Getting land donated from the town, that's a huge part of lowering your overall cost of capital for the project. Because some other projects out there, they might have to require getting you $5-10 million, and you might have to borrow money in order for you to buy the property. So that's why it's so risky in development. Here, Chris is so intelligent, so creative, because he knew the resources, but then he also got the land donated for free, which helps take a ton of risk off the table for the developer. So now that we're in entitlement, I think I want to make sure I super clarify. You got debt. So those are the 2 mortgage notes from the funding agency. Mm-hmm. And that was for the permanent side, right? For the construction side, is that 4% tax credit? Like, what do you guys see?
So we're using right now? It's basically just tax credit equity combined, the little tax credit equity that's in there at construction closing, combined with a massive construction loan. We have like a $23 million construction loan from a lender.
Oh, wow. That's like 80% of it, right? 85%.
Yeah, so
wow.
I could get into the nitty gritty. It took a while to get a loan approved that high.
Yeah.
Basically, the way production funds works in New Jersey, because it's a state funding source, if you put it in during construction and not at perm, it triggers prevailing wage. So the construction job becomes even more expensive than it already costs to build. So once the investor, and we have basically an investor and the construction lender is the same entity. Once they understood the parameters of the funding, I think they were more willing to go with not the greatest loan to value on the construction loan.
Wow, that's a very high leverage. Was that a HUD loan as well, or
no? That's a private bank loan.
Wow. Okay. All right. So now that we learned how you guys fund a $27 million project, great job, first of all, explaining that, because I know you went through so much more than that, Chris, than just like speaking through all the different amount of conversations. And if you had to give some sort of lessons learned from getting this project approved, can you give an example of just like general problems that you have run through during the entitlement phase or during the financing phase that you can share with the audience today? And how did you overcome those problems? No names.
I will say, I feel like a lot of your audience, if they're already developers, will tell me this is a horrible thing to even have gotten involved in when I say this. But so part of the reason this project is so expensive is that we are building out well and septic. We are not in a general sewer service area. So that has come with a lot of hurdles as far as getting through environmental approvals and very, very high costs, figuring out the water levels that we need to do, where we can put water, where we can put sewer, how much we're going to have to pay on the operational side to make that happen. So there's just going through the environmental regulations in New Jersey has just been a very heavy load, which is more than I've ever done before. And just to give you a little background, like we've done smaller projects with well and septic at the organization I'm at now. We just triggered a whole new level of approval standards by doing it on a LIHTC project of this size. So the regulations around water sewer, which I probably won't do much of in the future, but that has been the biggest hurdle by far on this project.
Wow. The thing I want to highlight, and this just shows how courageous and brave Chris is he has never done a project with that many environmental issues or regulations that he had to comply with and get the approvals for water and sewer. I mean, this is huge. But the point is, Chris still went forward because he knows he's helping people. But more importantly, everybody's listening to this. You will run across those problems that you probably have never faced before. But I always kind of go back to just It's about communication. It's about working alongside others, not working against them, and just trying to figure out like, hey, we're all on the same team here. We're trying to get this project done. We're trying to get this project approved to help some great, amazing, needy families. And I just want people to feel inspired by you, Chris. Like sometimes people feel like they need to understand and know everything in the world before they get started. And you're just a perfect example that you don't need that. Not saying you want to do it again, but you don't need to know everything.
And to be fair, like this municipality, I won't name them, but they've been like really good to work with. They've been super supportive. They've helped push things forward. That's one of the keys to having successful development, and not necessarily to have, you don't want to negative relationship with the municipality. Having a great relationship with the municipality is key to moving things forward. As long as you're both on the same page of what's getting built, it's going to make everything 9 million times easier.
I see what we did there. Also, but I think you make such a good point. I mean, for all of the audience listening right now, if you grow to Chris with an opportunity, let's say you found some land that the seller wants to build affordable housing, it would not hurt for you to talk at least to the city or the township or whoever's sort of in charge of approving projects to see whether or not they even want you there. Because this is a very steep hill to climb. There's no need to put more rocks in your backpack to go up that hill. You don't need it to be more steep. I love how you talked about that, Chris. So now that we covered the bigger project, how are you approaching your smaller project? You talked about a 3-unit and a 10-unit. What type of funding sources are there available in New Jersey, and how are you applying it to those projects?
Yeah, so there's a few different funding sources. New Jersey's pretty convoluted, but the law does allow for there to be a lot of sources and out there. They just happen to go through different agencies. And as I said, a lot of them don't play well together, so you can't mix and match a lot of them. But yeah, there's a funding source called the National Housing Trust Fund. That's actually a national funding source, and it's distributed to states kind of to act how they want with. I believe other states allow those to be intertwined with tax credits. Some other states, New Jersey does not. So the National Housing Trust Fund will fund 4 units or less of very low income housing, and it comes with project-based vouchers. The way the state does it right now, I should correct myself. I believe right now the program allows for 8 units, but when I got the current project that I'm working on funded, it was only allowing for 4 units or less. Yeah, so that is a 3-unit building for homeless or formerly homeless individuals in a nice suburb. It's 3 2-bedroom apartments. That should be done in a couple of months. And that was primarily, you can get up to $1 million from that funding source. So basically, we got the full $1 million, and then we have another $400,000 from the local county that was chipped into that. And it's going to include actually $100,000 escrow for social services for the residents of the 3 units. So that allows us to knock that out with a development budget for 10. That's like a 10-year escrow. So that'll be the operations side, which is, my agency is a nonprofit, so we will take on projects like that aren't necessarily, obviously a 3-unit building is not a cash cow necessarily, but having the vouchers and having that escrow allow it to stay whole and, possibly be positive on our ends, which is not easy to do on projects of that size.
No, I don't want people to underestimate how much work it is to support the homeless, right? You can target whatever population you want to target. They could be single moms, they could be veterans, or the homeless. I just want people to understand when they're underwriting these projects, you are really taking into account the supportive services that's required to help them truly get on their feet. And whether that's job training, whether that's mental health support, doesn't matter what it is. There just needs to be supportive services in your operating budget, because then otherwise you're not setting up your tenants for success.
Yeah. So, and then just to be clear, for the funding source, the National Housing Trust Fund, there are, and I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but there's only like 5 or 6 categories of special needs that do qualify. So like veterans, as you said, is one of them. Homeless is one of them. I don't think single moms counts as one of them, but it's sort of like in the specific projects rules what counts.
Got it. And did you have to take any debt on that? So it sounds like you had $1 million just from the affordable housing, the National Housing Trust Fund.
So I actually fought to not take any debt. The funding agencies sort of prefer you to show that you're taking some sort of debt, but it hasn't historically for my agency. It's really tough to have debt on projects of that size. So we were kind of able to get around to having any debt. So yeah, and we also have kind of we were floating money out of the agency a little while instead of taking a construction loan too, because the interest rates were just so high in construction loans. It just didn't seem to make any sense for these projects. Recently though, we've been able to tap into a really great pre-development source. I mean, I can get into that a little too at some point, but we have a revolving line of credit now for pre-development. That's kind of only available to somewhere. Yeah.
Gold mine. Everybody pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, at my old company, it was like a big company, and I didn't worry about pre-development expenses quite as much. But yeah, I mean, we don't have this massive operating budget where I work now, so that's always a little bit of a scare to start diving into projects. But we were able to. So we're part of a network called NeighborWorks. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's a national network of housing nonprofit organizations. So like we're one of 6 in New Jersey that are part of the network, but there's a whole bunch of them around the country. And then they link you with people that are also part of the network. And there's an organization out of Utah called NeighborWorks. It's not necessarily associated with the overall NeighborWorks, but it's called NeighborWorks Salt Lake City. And it's a CDFI. But so basically, it's like a nonprofit lending institution. But yeah, they have a program, and I don't necessarily know how they were able to come up with it, but it's available to nonprofits, preferably in that NeighborWorks network. And it's a $2 million basically revolving line of credit for development, and pre-development can be included in that. And it's basically you have to report back to them. I want to say bi-yearly. It could be quarterly. I might be wrong on that, but you report back to them every 3 to 6 months, basically. And then you have that loan for 5 years. And then there's options to extend it for 6 months a few times at the end of 5 years. But it's basically a $2 million line of credit that we can put towards pre-development, which are funds we don't normally have very readily available in-house, like at our organization. So that's actually been a really huge thing that we've been able to tap into on these small projects. And then we just report back what we've done with those funds. And some of them can be not being spent at the time. It's very loose as long as you're proving that you're trying to use it for development purposes.
Wow. And like what interest rate are we talking about on?
So it's 5.75, which I mean, maybe that's not fantastic right now, but I mean, a couple of, 6 months ago, it was pretty amazing. So,
I mean, I've seen people do at-risk capital for 10, 12, 15%. And
yeah.
I just want to make sure people understood what we were just talking about, right? In development, there are land costs that you buy the property to get it entitled, get it approved, and turn it into apartment buildings eventually, right? But throughout that entire process, there's things what I call is at-risk capital, because technically, if you spend all this money on engineering, architect, and environmental studies, topographical surveys, geotech reports, blah, 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 and if the project doesn't get approved, you might be out of luck because that money was just spent for a project that didn't get approved. And you were depending on these low-income housing tax credits to come through, but then all of a sudden you didn't win enough points or score enough points to win those tax credits. Now you might be out of luck. So that's why it's really at-risk capital in that situation. And that's why it makes it really hard to raise capital for at-risk capital. But Chris just talked about a great line of credit from this organization called NeighborWorks. I think I'm saying it correctly.
Yep.
But they specifically help nonprofits. And this is so huge. This is news to me. And I think Chris just opened a gold mine for me to even know about. But thank you so much for telling us about that, because that's a huge difference maker, especially for nonprofits that are trying to get projects approved. It's just harder and harder to raise capital every single day. And again, we're not soliciting any investments on this call. Full disclosure, it is not investment advice. We're not soliciting any investments. Okay. So thank you for sharing that so much. I hope to get somebody from that organization onto the podcast one day. If you were so willing to like make an introduction like that, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
How about a 10 units? How did you fund a 10 unit deal?
Yeah, so there's another funding source, is a state-specific funding source called the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So the other one was the national. This is the affordable, and this is through the same organization, NJDCA, the Department of Community Affairs, and they will provide up to $6 million to build projects of 25 units or less. So we have this project in the same town as the tax credit development. We have donated property again, and then we have around, I want to say $2.1 million from that available $6 million pot called the Affordable Housing Production Funds. And then we were able to get $400,000 from the Federal Home Loan Bank of New York, which is, you're probably familiar with that funding source. You can use, there are different FHLBs nationally that are kind of based on regions. FHLB and Windo has like numerous states that they'll fund kind of in the Northeast. And I think they include Puerto Rico as well in the same region. But yeah, they used to allow up to $40,000 a unit when we applied. I think that cap has since gone up to 60, but when we applied, 400 was the maximum we could get for 10 units. So we have the $400,000 from there. We also have, and I'm forgetting the exact number off the top of my head, but over $300,000 from, again, the local county, Monmouth County, New Jersey, who also supplied money on the other project I mentioned before. And then we have another around $300,000 that the township on top of the land donated. And just to put better perspective on that, that's another New Jersey thing. But the towns have something called the Municipal Housing Trust Funds, where anytime certain development takes place in the town, a small percentage of money has to go into a pot that has to go towards affordable housing development. So that's another funding source there. Basically, all those pooled together, my numbers might have been a little off, but it's a little over $3 million that we're in total for that project, all in development wise. And that's also under construction. Yeah, it's 10 one-bedroom apartments for seniors, kind of one level garden style apartments. So it's a very kind of basic building, but it fits into the community. It's nice.
Wow. I mean, just hearing about the sheer number of resources, is it you that's applying for all this money? Like how many people are we talking about that's dedicated to looking for all this money? Because it feels like you guys are digging for treasure here, essentially.
So it's interesting that you say that. I mean, I mentioned earlier just learning how to do development is a lot of falling on your face and learning and stuff. I worked at my old company. There was a lot of infrastructure. And to be honest, I mean, at the time I would get frustrated with it because sometimes it felt like, and I love my old company in case anybody hears this. I think everybody knows that I love it. But sometimes I felt like there was a lot of fingers like in the pot, like with what I was working on. And then I was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to be in charge of development. But it's one of the challenges that I've learned here is that I sort of came in to just being the head of development and then feeling this out without really having any staff. So I don't want to take credit for like a lot of what we've done, but it has been a lot of me applying for things. I recently hired a person from another tax credit developer who has worked wonders for us though, and has taken so much off of my plate, especially with that 67 unit development, like really ramping up now with what we're doing, as we're charging towards construction in the spring. And we have numerous other little pots in the fire. So so I have some help now. And then I am I'll reach out to a consulting firm, help me with filling out the state budget form and things like that, just because I just don't have the in-house support for that at our organization. We're a fairly small 501c3 nonprofit that has primarily been a social service agency. We do like mortgage counseling, housing stability services, wraparound homeless services, utility assistance, all sorts of financial counseling. There's all sorts of things we do that I'm probably not remembering right now. But the development side was sort of somewhere where our CEO wanted to go and she recruited me. I was very excited to be local and travel a little less and kind of be the one in charge of the whole thing. But it's been a huge learning curve for me to go from a lot of support staff to really a lot of it kind of being on my shoulders. And we've worked through it. I also, if I'm being honest, I came into this job saying I'm coming from a LIHTC developer. If we do 1 or 2 LIHTC developments every year or two, it would be great for this organization. Like it would be amazing for this organization. But we're sort of in a smaller region and we have our roots are like in all these local communities and not necessarily farther out than that. So I've adapted to this model where I'm saying, no, I'm just going to learn every single funding source and we're going to build every kind of affordable housing that we can. And honestly, it's coming together and working. But yes, it's been challenging and it's been a lot, but it's working.
What a guy. I mean, talk about a gem of a leader. I mean, that's you, Chris. You could have said, hey, I'm leading development and I'm too good for this. I shouldn't be doing this. I got to have somebody else. I need more staff. And you rolled up your sleeve. And that's one of the examples of a great leader. It's like people that are willing to roll up their sleeves and just get the work done and find the money, even though it might be overwhelming, to be frank with you, right? Some people might say, oh, wow, you got a grant from this person. You got the National Housing Trust Fund. You got the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Some people can't even keep their head straight. And here you are just showing everybody how you assemble the capital stack to make these projects come to life with the funding. I am so grateful for you coming on today, Chris. Well, there is someone that listened today, and I know they're going to be inspired by your story.
I know you just called me a great leader, but I just want to say at the place I work at, it is very inspiring to see a lot of employees around you that are really on the ground dealing with resident services and helping people and working a lot of hours for not always the most rewarding monetary situations. So it's just a lot of people putting in a lot of effort at my organization, and I feel spoiled sometimes to have no issue putting in a lot of work.
Man, I think that's the thing about affordable housing. And in the 2 years since I've been doing this podcast, Chris, I've met so many wonderful people with great hearts and people that aren't afraid to work hard for the right cause. And man, I'm just so grateful for you coming onto the podcast. I've learned so much from you today already, Chris, in this short amount of time. I know we got to wrap this up soon, but Chris, thank you again for what you do, because seriously, without people like you, I would have never had the home I grew up in. And I'm so grateful. Like, I sincerely mean that. And if people want to bring you opportunities, man, what are you even looking for now? Are you looking for more land? Are you looking for more investors? We're not soliciting investments. And are you looking for more talent to join your team? Tell us a little bit more about what your organization needs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always doing outreach to municipalities. New Jersey actually just so the law just changed in New Jersey. There's a new standard for how much housing has to be built in different towns, and they released a list of basically housing requirements for every municipality in the state over the next decade. So that's actually kind of increased receptiveness from a lot of municipalities that we're friendly with, but getting more serious in conversations with development. But yeah, I'm always open to talking to any towns. I'm certainly open to talking to anybody that has lands. Land is like not easy to come by in New Jersey. I'm sure it's not, you're in Massachusetts, I believe. I'm sure it's not easy to come by there either. But yeah, sometimes I talk to people from like Nebraska and it sounds like there's just this like unlimited amount of land. Not to say anything about Nebraska. I love everyone. But.
Well, Chris, we probably have enough time for one more question. This is a question I ask everybody. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. Why do you think affordable housing, particularly the lack of supply of affordable housing, is so hard to solve for?
Wow, there's so many directions to go with that question.
Yeah, I meant it to be broad, and there's no right or wrong answer. But the whole premise behind that question, Chris, is that people have told me that affordable housing is impossible to solve, and I disagree. I think with every guest that comes on the podcast, they bring another piece to the puzzle, and it's only a matter of time before we get all the pieces to the puzzle. Seriously. So I just love to hear your thoughts. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously in the current climate, and this doesn't go back historically to why there's not enough affordable housing, but in the current climate, it's just the amount of needed affordable housing keeps increasing because everything has gotten so expensive. The cost to live is insane for most people. You see a lot more temporary homelessness than you did previously or right now. Obviously, to build stuff, the construction costs are so high. So there's not necessarily enough money in a lot of states. And I come from a state that probably allocates more money than other states. I understand the need for regulations, but there's just so many roadblocks trying to get a housing project built. Every pot of funding comes with its own unique challenges. You deal with a lot of organizations where people don't necessarily coordinate with each other. There'll be environmental regulations. You have to deal with conflicting utility companies and all this while you're trying to go through these funding mechanisms that aren't necessarily understood by people in a utility company who are used to dealing with a private developer that's coming in with a regular private capital stack and moving on a normal timeline, versus no, you don't understand. I need this done by tomorrow because I'm going to lose my funding if you don't do this by tomorrow. There's just so many hurdles. And then obviously zoning is kind of an issue nationally. There's so many areas that have been historically zoned as single family housing areas that you don't necessarily have to plop giant apartment buildings in places, but you could easily allow for small multifamily buildings. I'm fitting my 3-unit building looks like a house in a neighborhood. It's 3 units though. It's not a single family house. There's things that can be done that don't necessarily ruin the characteristic of a neighborhood, but can increase the amount of people that can live in that neighborhood. Wow. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm rambling at this point, but
I loved all the things you brought up, from just how difficult it is to finance, to the zoning and regulations, to the multiple different parties that don't necessarily talk together. So sometimes even as a developer, now you're playing coordinator, you're playing communicator, you're playing just all sorts of different hats. And I think that's also why development is so exciting. You really do the same thing every single day.
There is an aspect of you can have 3 weeks of misery and then one little thing of good news can put you in the best mood ever.
That is the life of a developer. I want people to walk away with. But I thank you so much for being genuine and being real about what the job is, because I think when people look at buildings going up, they think it's oh, that can't be so hard. Some rich guy did it. They just had a lot of money, so they're not putting the deal together. But the ingenuity and the creativity that Chris was able to highlight for us today, I really hope everybody listens to this and really takes deep consideration that not only can you learn to be a developer like Chris, but more importantly, there are other roles in every organization that you can take on to create the impact that you want to make and help the people that you want to target. So that's what I want to leave people with. And Chris, any sort of last words or parting advice you want to give the audience today that's listening to you?
Yeah, well, first of all, I appreciate you having me on. This has been a fun hour. It's always fun to talk about this stuff. And Yeah, just I think the world needs more affordable housing developers. It's a very noble position, and as you were alluding to with your final question, there's not enough affordable housing. We have a severe lack of it around the country, and it doesn't seem to be getting better, even though I see so many hardworking people on the ground. So more people, and the more people advocating for more resources, the better.
Man, Chris, thank you so much. And for people that want to reach out to you or learn more about what you and your organization are doing, where can they reach out to you, Chris?
Yeah, you can reach out to www.housingall.org is my organization's website. And then you can email me directly, C Pugliese. It's CPUGLIESE. I'm assuming you can put that up somewhere at housingall.org.
All right, guys, blow up his email. Just kidding. Oh, just only send him valuable emails. Please make sure you follow Chris on LinkedIn and follow his work because this is an amazing guy and hope so many of you get to learn more from him. Chris, thank you again so much. I can't wait to have you back on maybe once your 67 unit deal is kind of up and the ribbon cutting is there. I cannot wait to hear the stories of the families that you're able to help. I really can't. So I appreciate you so much again, Chris, for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me.
All right. And we are out.